Hello, welcome to SaaS tutorial from Launchpad. In this tutorial, we are going to go over the definition of SaaS. How does SaaS compare to the traditional software models? We are going to touch upon the architectural decisions as it comes to developing SaaS software. Then we are going to briefly touch upon a key aspect of developing SaaS software, that is multi-tenancy. Then we are going to touch upon advantages as well as disadvantages or challenges in terms of adopting SaaS. And finally, we are going to sum up the tutorial going over some of the variants of SaaS as well as some of the other models that may be alternatives to SaaS. SaaS, or software as a service, or sometimes known as on-demand software, refers to subscription-based distribution model in which software is centrally hosted by the vendor along with all the resources such as hardware and database and provided to all its customers from a central location. There are many examples of SaaS software. Workday, Salesforce are some of the popular ones. Then we have Office 365, Slack, which is a communication tool, Jira, project management software, Adobe XD, which is a wireframing and mockup tool. SaaS is part of a broader cloud computing nomenclature. There are other examples of resources on cloud. As an example, there are services such as infrastructure as a service, platform as a service. If you want to go over all of these in detail, we recommend that you watch our other tutorials. Now let's see how SaaS compares to traditional software delivery model, something you may have been using 10 to 20 years back. Just like traditional software, SaaS also uses client-server architecture. While we are not going to cover client-server architecture in detail in this tutorial, to go over it briefly, think of it. A client is a user who's accessing the application through his or her computer, and then the server would be a centrally located computing power that is providing all the computational resources, application functionality to an extent, databases, and all of that to the client. So how does SaaS compare to the traditional software? 10 or 20 years back, your client or the end user software is something we refer to as fat client. So that would be an actual application, feature-rich application that would be installed and deployed on a person's computer for someone to be able to access the application. Think of Microsoft Outlook. 10 or so years back, you would need to install the Outlook on your device to be able to connect to the server and access your email. What happens today? Today, you can access your emails through Office 365, which has a thin client. What does that mean? That thin client is your web browser. So you do not need to install anything on your device anymore. You can access the application without having to install anything on your device. That is one difference. Second difference is how the application is hosted. Generally, 10 or so years back, the application, the associated code and everything would be sold by a vendor to an organization, and they would commission their own hardware, their data centers, and install and maintain the software there. They would put it on the internet as an example, so users can access it. That has now changed. So with SaaS software, you don't just get the software, but you also get the associated hardware, infrastructure, and everything. You don't need to buy anything. You don't need to maintain anything. And finally, the third difference, as mentioned earlier on in this presentation, is the payment model. SaaS is subscription based, so you don't need to pay a high upfront lump sum amount to buy the software. This is a subscription based model. You pay as you go, and you can also scale up or down based on your needs. There are multiple options available when it comes to SaaS subscription. Now, SaaS architecture is a very complex topic, something we are not going to cover in detail in this tutorial, but we have listed down a bunch of things here that you can look up online or watch some of our other tutorials. Some examples are how do you figure out the tenancy? And this is one topic that we are going to cover a little bit in the next section. Then you look at the overall architecture, client server architecture, how do you fine tune it? How do you deliver the services, that service oriented architecture? You look at the application design, MVC versus something else. How do you design the database? As an example, would all the clients in a database could have their separate tables, or would they share the tables with there being a client identifier that would kind of segregate the data for the clients or the customers? You look at making the overall software delivery secure through connections. What would be the network and associated speeds like? You look at the data maintenance aspects. So all of that is critical to when designing SaaS architecture. Now, one of the key decisions when it comes to designing SaaS software is about tenancy. We have two options, multi-tenant and single tenant. There's a third option as mentioned on the last screen, that's virtualization. It's not very common. We recommend that you look it up online. But what is the difference between multi-tenant and single tenant? Tenant is nothing but a customer who is using the software. So with multi-tenant approach, multiple customers use the same instance, single instance. They're going to share code, configuration, hardware, operating system, everything. In case the hardware reaches its limit, you can scale the hardware server up vertically, so increasing the computing power, RAM, and so on. But once you hit that limit, you can add more hardware, referred to as horizontal scaling. Customers, as expected, would benefit from resource sharing and would incur lower costs. The other option is single tenant. In this approach, every customer has its own instance, its own application, database, and hardware. As expected, they would have better control over software and data and maintenance and upgrades. But with that comes, as expected, higher cost and maintenance effort. We have done a separate tutorial just on multi-tenancy. We recommend that you watch that tutorial. Now let's go over the advantages of SaaS. First of all, there's fast and easy deployment. So if your company wants to use SaaS software, you don't need to buy any servers, install the application over it. You simply go and subscribe, and that works. Then there's easy application access. So the end users within an organization, they don't need to install anything. They don't need to work with the IT department to get applications installed. And if there are any issues, there are none of those maintenance efforts. You simply access the application through your web browser. There's lower upfront cost. So with the older models, you had to pay a high upfront fee in terms of buying the software, but you don't need to put in all that money with SaaS software. You pay as you go. If you don't like the software, you can scale down or you could stop using the software. As mentioned earlier, there's no hardware costs in terms of buying or maintaining the the servers. However, some of that cost obviously is built into the SaaS subscription fee, but then that also comes at a lower cost because you can scale up and down, and then you're also sharing the servers and the resources with other software organizations who are buying the software. And then there's lower ongoing cost, as mentioned earlier, because you're sharing the resources. There's ease of maintenance and upgrades. You don't have your own software, so you don't need to have your dedicated IT team for software and server management. And finally, as mentioned a couple of times earlier, there's ease of scaling. You can start with 10 users. If you like the software, you can expand it to other teams within the organization. If you don't like it, you can scale down. All of those are fairly easy options with SaaS. Now let's take a look at some of the challenges when it comes to using and adopting SaaS. So you have lesser control over software upgrades. And what happens is that one customer's problem becomes everyone's problem. There might be a critical bug and you may not even be using the functionality in which the bug exists, but there's going to be an upgrade and that may not suit the downtime that you prefer. Then there's a limit to customization, and this probably applies to most of the other software delivery models as well, unless you're thinking of a custom application that has been built for your organization and you can customize it whichever way you want. But because the SaaS software vendor needs to maintain a design and architecture, they cannot always meet all your customization requirements. There are security concerns when it comes to security of data and connectivity, and that's why some of the organizations where you have some of the industries where you have regulations such as healthcare and banking, the adoption to SaaS has been slower. Finally, with some organizations, the SaaS vendor may not be able to meet the service level agreements. Compare it to, if you have the software and the maintenance team working with you on site, you may be able to fix and respond to bugs faster, but that may not happen with a SaaS vendor who might be working off thousands of customers and you're just one of those customers. So that's been a challenge. And finally, sometimes connection speed could be an issue. So if a user is accessing certain software installed over internet for an organization, it may be faster to access compared to something being accessed over the internet. And then, application design might also play a role sometimes in that. So. Now, in the last section, we are going to look at some of the variants of SaaS, as well as comparison of SaaS to some of the other models. So in terms of delivery and focus, SaaS has two variants referred to as horizontal and vertical. So with the SaaS vendors that are more horizontal, they have a product that's focused on certain category. So you may have a software for finance department, and the software vendor would provided services to finance departments across different industries, be it healthcare, banking, procurement, chemicals, everything. And then the second option is vertical focus, where a software vendor would be providing its software to a specific industry. Think of it as healthcare. So you may have a full suite of products for a hospital. You may have a product for scheduling department, a product for IT, a product for billing department, a product for clinics, a product for emergency rooms, and so on. Now there are other two models that have often have sort of come up, and we're going to look at how they compare to SaaS. We're going to briefly touch on that. So one is hosted, and this has kind of been used interchangeably with SaaS, but it's not SaaS. With hosted model, you essentially buy the software and then you host it somewhere on the cloud, on the server, and you may have a company that yourself or someone maintaining it. You're not paying subscription for it. You pay a lump sum amount. You may have better control over data, security, even customizations, but it's not SaaS. And then there's application service provider. This is a different delivery model, and some people say that SaaS kind of evolved from it. Application service providers, they focus on delivering a certain application to a company and its users. For example, you may buy a software and an application service provider would host it for you on a server, and then they would ensure that that software is delivered to all your users through a protocol, let's say HTTP. If you want to learn more about hosted and ASP, we recommend that you watch one of our other tutorials, or alternatively, look them up online. So that sums up this tutorial. Thanks for watching this video. If you have any feedback or suggestions, please put that in the comment section of the video, or alternatively submit your feedback at launchpad.com. Thank you.